welcome to VC Upside Down. My name is David. Harry introduced me, and my only plug here is Alma Angels, a community of diverse angels that are looking to back ambitious female founders. This is my one of my passions and one of my amazing side projects. But without further ado, I want to invite our panelists and talk about different paradigms that we're going to change and how are they changing in the VC ecosystem. So Ella.
Hi, David.
Hey.
Hi, everyone.
Great to have you. I think I already told you that we want to know a bit about yourself, where you work for, or what is the organization, and the thesis that you have. And I assume you have one. So let's start with that.
Sure. So I'm the co-founder of Zinc VC. So even though we are called VC, we're not a traditional VC in the sense that we don't invest in ventures and companies. We actually invest in people, in talent. So what we do is we look for the best people out there who want to make some social impact and make a dent in the universe in terms of things like mental health, the quality of later life, and the impact of automation and globalization. And we do so by bringing them together around those programs, missions, we call them. And we help them find their co-founders and start a venture that is going to be scalable and commercial. So eventually they will build ventures that will go on to be funded by different funders, including VCs. And our kind of thesis is that by putting those missions to them, we're going to get the best talent out there in the world. So far, we've been able to attract over 2,000 people from around the world to apply to our programs, and we've supported 150 founders. Very diverse in terms of backgrounds, like ethnicity, age, gender, etc.
Wow. Excellent. So my next guest for today will be Priya. And can we see her? Excellent. Hey,
Hi,
Priya.
David. Thank you so much
for
the invitation. So my name is Priya Guha. I'm a venture partner at a fund called Merian Ventures. We're a San Francisco headquartered fund, invests in the US and UK, specifically in female-led deep technology innovation. And the reason we focus on female-led technology is for the reasons you stated in your introduction, David. Women have across the world not received the same amount of capital investment as other founders, and that's also the same for other underrepresented groups. So our mission really is to try and spot the amazing ideas that just aren't getting the right funding and support those to scale both in the US, UK, and globally.
Oh, excellent. So the third panelist is actually another man, amazingly. Eamonn, are you joining?
Yes, here I am. This feels like the Eurovision dialing in from my kitchen. The votes of the Irish jury are in. So listen, thanks very much for having me. My name's Eamonn Carey. I'm the managing director of Techstars here in London and also a partner at the fund. So Techstars is one of the most active early stage investors in the world. We run 50 accelerator programs around the globe, taking in 10 companies into each program, putting them through a 3-month program of connecting them with great mentors, advisors, partners, and investors, and helping them to do 2 years worth of work really in 13 weeks. We've invested in over 2,000 companies around the world. I've invested both through Techstars and as an angel in over 50 companies across a wide range of sectors. And yeah, looking forward to sharing some thoughts with the rest of the group today.
Excellent. And last but not least, somewhere across the world next to a beach, there's Nicola joining us. Hopefully the connection is good enough, Nicola. Can you hear me?
Yes. Hi, David. How is everyone? Really, really happy to be here. And yes, I am close to the coast in northern Germany, trying to get a bit of inspiration from looking at the sea, but really pleased to be here today. I've been building companies for the last 20 odd years or so. And I, at some point have come to terms with the fact that I need to do something with entrepreneurs. So I've recently joined a company called OptioPay, an open banking scale-up, just closing Series B as a chief commercial officer. But also for the last 1.5 years, I've been heavily involved with impact investing, working with companies like Village Capital, helping an impact fund called Planet A raise money, and also being on the board of 2 impact startups. And I believe that we need to change KPIs and we need to change the way we look at valuing companies if we want to help solve greater problems in our world through technology.
Excellent. So we have mission-driven investor, we have women-focused, we have a global startup early stage, and we have impact. Now the main question is, what actually is the difference when you talk about investment? One of the most important things that founders and entrepreneurs are always talking about is to get the access to investors. It's always about who you know. And one of the main questions I want to start with is, how are you or your organization breaking that access paradigm? So it's not just about who you know and how you know through the same school and the same network, but more about changing paradigm and allowing entrepreneurs to get access to investors. Ella, shall we start with you?
Sure. So I guess the way we think about it is that by creating those calls for applications, so we put forward a mission and we say we're going to look for people who have passion to help and solve the issue of mental health or women's mental health. That was our first program. And basically what we're looking for is not necessarily people who have built companies before. This is not what we will judge you on. We will judge people on 3 main things. So one is, can they demonstrate the passion, and in a way we talk about obsession to solve a problem. So we're starting with the problem, and can they show us that they have been thinking about it for a while, they've done something about it. There is this kind of an internal motivation or drive for them to put the next 10 years of their life into solving that problem. So that's the most important thing for us. Then we actually look for people who have what we call a spike. So rather than looking for people who are well-rounded, we look for people who have a very certain kind of either skill or insight or knowledge. So it could be a domain knowledge. So that could be a psychiatrist or someone who works as a GP or someone who works with young, vulnerable populations. It could be a product or an engineer. It could be a salesperson or a commercial person. It could be a teacher. So it actually really opens up the kind of people that would see themselves as potential, future founders. And lastly, we look for people who have the ambition and the scale of thought and the vision to build something that is going to be of global scale, that is going to be commercial, that they believe in the thesis that in order for them to make that change in the world, they need to build companies that are commercial, that are big, that can be scaled. So when you think about that compared to the average, entrepreneur or venture capital backed founder for the last 10 or 15 years, these are very different people. And we believe that by putting the mission in the center of how we call for talent, actually what we're able to bring is people that otherwise would not consider themselves as founders. So we get people who were producers at the BBC, who this woman said, I would have never considered myself a founder, but I did. When I see the application, the call for application, I realized that this was my calling. We have a woman in her kind of 50s who was a CEO of a CCG, so that's an NHS kind of organization where she was managing very large budgets, but she would never consider herself as this kind of hipster founder, but now she's building a company as well. So it really attracts people that otherwise wouldn't consider themselves as founders. And I think that creates access. And then what we do, on the other hand, is through those missions, we also pull the people who want to support them. We pull the funders, the VCs. We open access to them to other parts of the ecosystem. And so if you think about it, it's kind of bringing people in, going through the process, and then connecting them to the ecosystem.
So it's a lot more towards the mission aspect. And that basically galvanizes people that never thought about doing this by publicizing around the mission. They can actually reach out to you and everybody's considered. Does that make sense?
Exactly, yeah. So the mission is kind of the reason why we're able to attract very diverse group of people that would not consider themselves as founders. So if you say, hey, are you a founder? Those people will probably say no. If you say, are you passionate about the area? Would you want to spend the next 10 years of your life building something that will make an impact, you'd say yes and take the risk. And
So actually, that makes me think about Priya, and you're already focused on female founders. So theoretically, it sounds easy, but it still probably works through networks, right? Or do you have a different way to get access to deal flow, to get access to entrepreneurs?
So, you know, the things that Ella's just described as looking for in founders are the things that, you know, frankly, most investors would want to see, you know, that passion and drive for the business that they're building. For us, you know, clearly a lot of people come to us through networks, through the fact that we're present at events, through people knowing us. But what we try and do is also be very visible for other people, have a website where people can also pitch directly through the website, just so, you know, if someone doesn't happen to be bumping into us or be directly connected, that they have a means to get to us. The other thing that I think is really important here, though, is also, you know, if someone's not a right fit for us, how can we help them? It's about, as Ella was just saying, connecting to the broader ecosystem. There's a fantastic ecosystem here in the UK, but also in every tech capital across the world. And one of the obligations I think we have as people working in investment is to say, you might not be a fit for us, but I know somebody else for whom you might be a great fit. So how can I help you get connected to them? And that network effect is something where investors can make a real difference if they want to make that additional contribution.
So creating bridges on top of that, because you're a global firm, right?
Absolutely, exactly. Creating bridges, creating connections. And I think, you know, supporting the democratization of access for people who might have historically not had that sort of access that would get them investment relatively easily.
So, Eamonn, you actually work for a global fund. You're based in the UK, but you cover the entire European continent. So how do you get, how are you able to do all of that with being a very, two-people team? But more importantly, how do you make sure that you have different founders coming to you?
Yeah, so I mean, we have an open application process. So, you know, on F6S and other channels, people can apply. We review every single application that comes through, frequently hundreds or over 1,000 of them for different programs. And we've had plenty of companies that have come through. Versus, who did the program last year, applied from Nigeria, ended up getting on the program with us and had an amazing experience. And that was, you know, without any connection in via the network. It was a cold application. They were working on something that I thought was really amazing. It was an incredible founding team with a real passion for what they were building. And so I think the open applications helps an awful lot. I joke about this an awful lot as well, but I mean, in the early days, certainly, and still until comparatively recently, for obvious reasons, I used to go to the opening of an envelope. Like, I would go to every event, I would go to, you know, every talk, I would attend every webinar, and I would try my best to kind of open the network up to founders as much as possible. I've always tried to reply to as many people as I can on Twitter and on LinkedIn. I've always had open direct messages, and the reason I do that is because I was a founder myself, and you know, I remember what it was like going out and trying to raise capital and not getting replies to messages, and I remember now some of those cold emails that I sent were perhaps not necessarily great, but you know, I think for me it's really important to try and open the door to as many people as possible. And as an organization, as Techstars, you know, we've made a substantial kind of commitment to diversity and inclusion during the Obama administration. At the White House, you know, we have run a huge amount of kind of open access events. We've tried to open the network up and partner with more and more people through the Techstars Foundation, and increasing access to entrepreneurship and much more. So I think for me, it's a question of just being open, having conversations with people, and also, I think, similar to what Priya said, trying to support the companies where maybe there isn't a fit, or where we can't invest, or maybe where they're too early. And you know, we've released Entrepreneurs Toolkit, where people can go on and get access to Techstars resources that normally only companies going through the program can get access to. We're hosting an awful lot more office hours.
Something else, right? On top of what Techstars did, you also created something else to help entrepreneurs get access to investors, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. I mean, I find it actually really personally frustrating that great companies don't raise capital all of the time, right? I think the system that we operate in as a venture community is flawed in a whole variety of different ways. And so, yeah, when I moved back from New York, I had a bunch of friends of mine there saying, "Hey, send us interesting deals you see from Europe." And so I started sending out a deal flow newsletter basically every 2 weeks. It started out going to a couple of angels and VCs in New York. It now goes to over 800 angels and VCs around the world, and feature 3 or 4 different companies that I've met that either I have invested in, or I'm going to invest in, or I would love to invest in, or that I can't invest in for they're maybe too far along, and try and share that deal flow with other great people who want to support founders. So I think there's lots of things that we can do to build better networks and better connections, and fundamentally help the best possible companies get funding and open the network up globally, because I think capital has become a lot more mobile and will become even more mobile over the next couple of years.
So if I summarize it for the founders that are watching, Eamonn is open to cold emails, and he can share with hundreds of investors in the US and Europe, right?
I well-researched cold emails, right? So if you send me a mail merge, it's like I'll know somewhere in my brain, I'll have figured it out. But I mean, I invested in a company called On last year, where they said, I still remember the first line of the email. They said, "We know that you love mischief and brands that have a sense of personality." And they went on to talk about what they were doing. But that little bit of research, I've spoken and written at length about the importance of mischief and humor in product design. And I've also spoken and invested in a bunch of companies in direct-to-consumer brands that have a personality. And so that one line was enough to get me to the rest of that email. So, cold emails work if you put a little bit of work in. If you send the same email to a list of 1,500 investors that you've bought off the internet, might not work.
No, but now everybody's going to mention that you like mischief when they email you after the session.
Yeah. Well, I mean, at least they've done enough research to listen to me on the session.
Fair point. So just thinking out loud, and this is for Ella, Priya, and Eamonn. I think we lost Nicola. But do you know, or have you seen any tools that actually use software to get access? Because we talked a lot about what we do as people connecting and making bridges. But do you have a tool or a company that you saw that actually helps doing that better? So whoever wants to go first, please feel free to raise your hand and go for it. Cool. So if nobody wants to go first, I actually mentioned NFX. So NFX, actually just literally Google NFX, the 3 letters, has created an amazing platform where you can basically apply online, get a feedback guarantee within 3 days, within 2 weeks. You get an investment decision, and within something like 9 weeks, I think, cash in the bank. ADV, the company I co-founded as well, guarantees feedback to everybody that applies. Accelerated Ventures. There's a lot of software coming to help founders get feedback and hear back from investors. So go for it, Ella.
I wanted to say not a software, but I think there are a lot of resources. So if you do search online, if you do Google, there are a lot of kind of office hours. So Playfair Capital is hosting one, or did just recently. So there's always things that are happening, accelerator. So depending on kind of where you see yourself affiliated in terms of, are you part of a certain network or community? If you really research well, wherever you are in the world, there's and I think Priya was talking about this kind of ecosystem support in the UK. It's amazing. Diversity VC. There are different organizations that are really trying to make it easier for people to get feedback, to get access, to ask questions, because you don't always have that support. You don't know what to ask even. So I think if you do that research and you look for those opportunities, just go and do it. Go and have a chat with an investor. Go and have a chat with other founders. Get feedback. Put yourself out there. So I think don't just rely on one-to-one emails. There are a lot of things that are happening. The ecosystem is very active. I know that London Tech Week is organizing Tech Invest for female founders. So there are initiatives. I'm personally. We're very we can do whatever we can do with our founders, and we try to give back to the community, but everyone is trying to do something. So if you actually research well, I think at every given week, there is something happening that could be relevant to you. So if you're a founder out there, I suggest more than just those kind of online platforms, try and find the opportunity for you to meet people and get some feedback.
And Priya, you also had some a good example to share.
Sure. I mean, I was just going to comment on the NFX example. First of all, founded, as you know, co-founded by an ex-British entrepreneur called Pete Flint, who was the founder of Truly, a very successful company that scaled out there in the US. They have an amazing platform, and their thesis has, as you rightly say, been designed to break the sort of conventions of VC, which is fantastic. The challenge, though, I think, comes where people don't even know where to start to then look for places like NFX, which have a really great platform. And as we've just been discussing, you can go to investors, you can use the ecosystem, but I think the third piece of the puzzle that's really, really important is to use your own peer group. So find people who are maybe, a few months, a year ahead of the journey than you are, understand where they would suggest you go for advice, use them as a sounding board, use them for introductions and connections, because that peer group can actually be one of the most powerful things I've seen to transform the journey for someone, particularly for somebody who might not have as easy instant access to those networks as other people.
Yeah, definitely. I think this is a good time to give a shout out to YSYS, a community of Black and Asian and underrepresented minorities. Deborah has been doing an amazing job over the last 3 years building that community, and it's just about founders connecting and helping and building new networks on top of the ones that we had before or that are existing in the ecosystem. So actually, I want to move a bit to the side and raise a different type of question. I think there's a big saying in terms of when you talk about startup over the last decade is that as long as your top line revenue is growing, you can justify anything, or you have to lose money in order to scale fast. And this kind of changed and created the dichotomy of how you build companies versus you build startups. So this one is more for Nicola to start with. Do you actually agree with it? And if yes or no, tell us why. And can you give us an example of a startup? All right, I think we just lost her. Excellent. And so with that note, perhaps we'll bring Ella for that one. Do you think fast scaling and growth at all costs is the right approach?
Oh, I can jump in.
Ella has changed face. Go.
Oh, sorry. I was just. Why don't you bring us both or all of us? Because I know that Nick is offline, so we can take it. But I think VC funding, the way it is done now, is very, very, very specific. It doesn't apply to a lot of companies. Not every founder should aspire to be VC backed. I think there is a very specific model, and one of the things we tell our founders is to try and understand how the VC industry works. So you understand what are the motivation of an investor, of a VC. They have their own investors. They have to return a certain amount of money back. How does it work? What the mathematics behind it? So you understand how they select companies to back. And when a VC says it's not for us, it doesn't mean it's not a good company or your model is not going to work or you're not an incredible entrepreneur. It just means that it doesn't fit their thesis. And a lot of it is driven by some way of returning the investment that was put into their fund, and that looks as fast scale. So I don't think it's right for everyone, and I think the economy cannot be relying on that only. Our thesis, but personally my thesis, is that we need different kind of companies as well. Specifically when we think about mission-led approach, and also the founders that we want to attract for Zinc is the companies that are actually maybe, before we had this call on Friday, Eamonn was talking about, a company that had a 30 million exit. For a VC, that's a write-off, that's not success. For a founder who worked really hard to get there and sold a company or had been able to build something of scale that created jobs, that made an impact, that's a huge achievement. And also for his shareholders, so depending who they are and when they kind of got in, it could be a really good deal. So I think that people need to really think, first of all, what is the kind of company that I want to build? What kind of founder am I? What kind of impact I want to have? What kind of growth do I want to see? And what is my plan? Is it to exit? Is it to build something that will have some kind of longevity, years to come? Do I want to sell it back to employees? So people are talking about employees-owned companies. So there are so many different models. And then once you know what's your vision, who you want to be, what kind of company you want to build, then you find the right funders to support you on that kind of road and that journey. And if VC is the right answer, then go for it, and that's great. And there's a whole ecosystem, but it doesn't have to be that, and that actually doesn't fit most companies in the world. So if you look around, if you look at our economy, actually most of it is made up of companies that are not VC backable. So a lot of VCs would say no to a lot of the brands you're buying, a lot of the goods you're using, a lot of the food you're consuming. And so if we only relied on VC backable companies, our world will look really, really different. So just be conscious. And also once you're on that kind of path, it's really difficult to get off. So that's the other thing to remember. It's a bit like a hamster wheel.
So Eamonn, you almost became Ella for a second, but why are you?
Yeah, I love the upgrade, by the way.
It's look, I'd agree with what Ella just said. Like, I think one of the challenges is, once you get on that hamster wheel, it is extremely difficult to get off it. And I think it is incumbent on companies to understand that maybe not necessarily getting VC funding is not necessarily the worst thing that can ever happen, right? Like the first company that I started, we did this crazy thing where we built something people wanted, we charged them money for it, and when we made enough money, we hired more people. And that was partially because there wasn't much of a VC ecosystem in Ireland 15 years ago, and also partially because that was the type of business that we naturally became. So I think we're seeing a lot more companies now think very carefully about the angel investors that they raise from, or the path that they take as they're building the company, to go, well, maybe actually they just need to do an SEIS or an EIS round, or maybe they just need to raise a small amount of money to get the ball rolling, and then the rest can grow through revenue. And now you have Clearbank and Uncapped and lots of other people coming along to help with revenue-based financing, which again kind of allows companies to potentially keep more control over the equity within their businesses. So I think the days of having to rely on kind of raising round after round after round every 18 months and the challenges that come with that, they're not over by any stretch of the imagination. There will always be companies that need to grow in that way. But I think you're starting to see, AngelList and Funderbeam and Seeders and lots of other people offer clever ways for companies to get funding. I think you're starting to see, as I said, Uncapped and others allowing companies to grow by just, invoice factoring and various different forms of financing. So I think the ecosystem is getting a lot more interesting as a result. And I hope we see more of those 20, 30, 50 million exits over the next little while, because that's a life-altering amount of money for most people to make, particularly if you think of it in the context of, okay, you've given away maybe 10% of your company, that's quite a lot of money.
Priya?
So I was going to make a slightly different point, actually. I think, agree with everything that Eamonn and Ella have said, but even for those companies for whom VC-backed sort of unicorn aspiration growth is what they want to do, the concept of the sort of move fast and break things that used to be, the motto for that sort of business has gone. Even for those companies that have that vision of scale and ambition and are getting the best named global VCs in to back them, they have to be conscious about how they scale. We're seeing this with the focus on sort of ethical application of technology. We're seeing that with the broader societal implications of technology. You cannot just grow at all costs without looking at the impact that business has on so many different aspects of the world around you. And that is a huge change, because I think there used to be an impression that you could just scale at high growth, high impact, and everything else would fit into place. I think we've demonstrated that's not the case. So even for the businesses who have that ambition, they have to scale in a different way to be as impactful and grow in the way that they need to be growing.
Okay. That is a great segue to our next question, but I just want to raise and shout for two organizations that actually address different aspects of capital. One of them is IndieVC, that is basically backing founders that just want to grow businesses in a good, steady state, but has a repeatable business model. And another one, which is 20 minutes term sheet, which I don't know if you've heard about it, but they came up with an idea saying if you're mainly on marketing, you don't need to raise VC money and dilute your business. If you give us the data, we can actually, within 20 minutes, give you a term sheet that will use the capital to purely marketing. And then you can basically return it with a 6% interest over a year as part of your revenue. So it's growth capital for purely marketing without dilution. So segueing from Priya's comment about basically impact businesses and what's the more than one bottom line. One of the challenges is a lot of VCs say you can't do both. It's either you're running an impact business or you're running a global startup. Can you think, first of all, do you agree with that? And we'll start with Priya. And if yes, why? And if you don't, can you give us an example of a startup that actually has both impact and scale?
So, I mean, I think putting those in two different boxes misses the reality of where business is going. You know, we've seen the FTSE 100 CEOs, global top 100 CEOs, all recognizing the point that, Mark Benioff from Salesforce was the first person to talk about that, companies have an obligation, not just to their shareholders, but to all of their stakeholders. So the broader society that they impact. That, I think, is where the world is going. So this concept that a high growth global business can somehow not be conscious of its impact and ensure that impact is positive is just, for me, completely spurious. I think, actually, for me, Salesforce is a great example of a business that from day one, when the company was just 50 people, embedded into its ethos the 1-1-1 model, where you have 1% of equity, 1% of staff resource time, 1% of product going towards causes that added value in the communities that they operate. And that's an incredibly powerful tool that's been replicated across, I think, 2,000 plus other businesses of that size and scale. So really, really important, I think, to not see these as very different models, that a large scale global business can have impact. And that if you are a company that is mission driven or an impact business, you can't grow to be a global business. I think the two are intrinsically linked in today's society.
So actually, as the mission-led investor, Ella, I think the flip of the next stage is to you, right? So you don't believe in impact and mission-driven businesses. That's out, right?
We don't. So we are mission-driven. By the way, we don't talk about impact investment because I think that's kind of a different bucket. I think, to Priya's point, but there are two different things that I would want to maybe point out. One is how do you build a company that has this kind of a culture from the outset that is, taking all stakeholders into account rather than the shareholders, and that's your employees, your suppliers, your customers, etc. And I think the opportunity when you start a company now is that if you don't do that at the very outset, if you don't have a diverse pool of talent before you're kind of 20 employees, it's going to be really difficult to then change it. So I think as being founders now, and I know this is something top of mind for a lot of the founders that I work with, is they think from day one, how do we create a culture and our vision is such that we're going to become a certain kind of company. So I think that's one thing. Then I think the second level is, do you build a company which business model and reason to exist is very much about making a change that has societal impact, which is not necessarily when Salesforce started, that's how they view the world. I think they fall into the first bucket of, actually, as we do that, we want to make sure we provide value to anyone in our ecosystem. And I think that's like really inspiring and amazing. And to see that at scale, I think that's kind of where it gets really exciting. So what we are working on is beyond that, is actually making sure that the companies we built, their reason for existence, the reason why they exist, and if they didn't, then there'll be less of impact in the world in terms of them trying to solve a specific societal issue, whether it's improving the quality of later life or mental health of young women and girls. And I don't think we have a lot of companies that had achieved that over the last kind of 20 years. So if you do look at the FTSE 100, or if you do look at the unicorns of the world, not a lot of them have really embedded that kind of business model that looks at solving big societal issues as well as being commercially successful. But there are a few, and they're growing, and it's exciting. And what we're trying to do from our side is actually build a pipeline of very, very early stage companies, knowing that not all of them will go on to be that big and that successful, but hopefully we'll start be part of, or we are part of an ecosystem that is trying to make more of those companies and build them very consciously.
Excellent. So, Nicola, I think the connection is good enough.
Yes.
So, your thoughts about impact investing and actually building scalable global companies while also being impact driven?
Yeah, well, I think just really looping in from what Alice just said, I think a lot of founders who come from a different background or have a different goal in mind need more support in the very early stage to get to where they can actually receive commercial investment and can actually deliver on commercial KPIs. And I think as more money goes into the space and using technology and combining people is more important to solve those greater issues. And I think what we need to expect is those companies will take a longer time to take off, but with the right partners, and I think partners are incredibly important, like corporates that need to contribute assets potentially. I think it's a longer tick until there's takeoff, but because so many people recognize that you need to bring in commercially viable technology solutions to this world to solve greater problems, I think impact investing needs to lose this charity and philanthropy approach, and we shouldn't see it as that anymore. It's just a new form of investing with potentially a different set of KPIs. And also, we need the tools to actually measure those different KPIs, and we need to measure the impact. And I'm seeing quite a few people putting analytics in and really trying to help those entrepreneurs. And what I find really helpful, like Alice said, in terms of a different kind of entrepreneurs coming up, is that you help them with investor readiness programs, you help them with partnerships, and as many people have said before, the networking aspects and combining people with assets that can help grow those companies, but also with the commercial savviness and the commercial acumen. That's what's going to make those companies viable. And I think that's when investing becomes fun in those companies.
Yeah, I think there's a very interesting stage of development in what we call social or impact-driven businesses, where at the beginning it was mainly philanthropy, and then it became companies like Salesforce that dedicate a percentage to help the community or whatever cause they want. And today, with technology, you see more and more mission-driven founders that come and basically align the impact and the mission with the overall revenue model. So it's not contradictory, and actually, the bigger the impact, the more revenue you have. And there's a great company called WeFarm that actually does that for small-scale farmers in Africa and Asia. But following up on that, I think we all mentioned network support, advice, to founders. And that's something really interesting because Vinod Khosla, which is one of the most renowned investors, VC investors, was also the founder of Sun Microsystems, is quoted about 6 or 7 years ago in an article in TechCrunch saying 90% of VCs don't add value. However, almost all investors believe they do add value. So my question, and this is up for grabs, whoever wants to start with that one, is in your business, how do you add value and how do you actually measure and know that you're valuable to founders?
I thought the director added Eamonn first.
Thanks for that. Thanks for the hospital pass. I think, look, first of all, I think maybe the proportion is too high, but the reality is that actually a lot of investors don't add a lot of value outside of capital. So I think there are some things, I wrote an article a couple of years ago telling startups that they needed to do their due diligence on the people who are putting money into their company and do your reference checking, talk to companies that they've backed before, make sure you're getting, the money from the right people who are going to actually be able to, get involved and be helpful. And if they're going to be board members, be ones that are constructive and productive and useful. I mean, in terms of how I add value, I suppose, look, one of the big things is just introductions and support, right? And so from a support perspective, I've been a founder. I have that kind of empathy, I suppose, for what companies are going through. And we've gone through kind of growing into international markets. We've gone through kind of our first B2B sales. We've gone through in the last financial crisis, laying people off and all of the kind of horrible stuff that goes with that. So I think I spend a lot of time one-on-one with founders talking through the ups, downs, ins and outs of what's going on, not just during the Techstars program, but pretty much still every day with lots of them. And then I think the other big thing is just kind of opening your Rolodex or opening your connections as much as possible. So trying to get founders connected to the right people to help them with hiring or with capital or with any of the needs that they will have as they grow and scale their business. Like mostly companies need access to great talent, they need access to customers, and they need access to capital. And I think then every so often a shoulder to cry on as well. And I think if you can start to kind of hone your skills at delivering on some or all of those things, then you will be someone that can add real value for founders in different ways.
Okay, so let's go to Priya. I'm really interested to hear what you have to say around that, especially because there's a lot of less access network on female founders.
I mean, clearly all the things that Eamonn just said are absolutely relevant. I think one of the really interesting things, though, and Paul Graham, one of the founders of Y Combinator, was talking about this recently, is the different ways that investors support, potentially also based on geography and how European investors can perhaps be more interventionists. One thing investors need to remember is they're there to support the business, not to run the business, and that's one of the fundamental things that I think some investors do get wrong. And in addition to the points that Eamonn makes there about how you can practically support, I think one of the biggest ways you can add day-to-day value is actually through the board. And if you do have a seat on the board, making sure that that board operates in a way that is, giving the right checks and balances, as you would expect, but also supporting the founder and the direction of travel for the business. Boards are so fundamental, and I've seen so many horror stories of boards and chairs of boards in particular being just very, very difficult for founders. And I think that's where investors can add a lot of value.
So then we need a panel only on how not to F up boards. Cool. So we only have 2 minutes to go. Ella, your main insight on how to drive value as an investor.
Yeah, I think it really changes also at what stage you are in terms of your life cycle as a company. I think one of the things that I think are really important, and we touched upon it a bit, is the social capital. So not just the cash, but actually the connections you can make. Can you draw in the right people to support the founders on their journey? That's one. Second one is personal development. We've embedded on the back of just learnings from our first program, executive coaching. So every founder on our program is offered executive coaching and also team coaching. And I think a lot of early stage investors talk about investing in talent, but the support is more around the product and the venture. So how do you actually support the founders as they need to evolve and grow with the company? That is another thing that I would highlight.
Okay. And last but definitely not least, the person that actually builds company, Nicola. You're also an investor, but you're playing on both sides. How do you see the strongest added value?
2 final points, because I think we're ready to go. But really, I think, like in a career, potentially also think about the investor you would like to have after this current round. So you want to make sure that you get the right people in now who can then support maybe the next stage of growth investor that comes in. And secondly, and I think that's super important, find investors who share the same vision and passion about the sector or the technology you're in. And someone who has a belief in the long-term growth, especially if you're going into a sector that is not super developed yet, and really find someone who completely shares your belief and is ready to go, the next 3, 4, 5 years with you, and not just the next 1 or 2 with your KPIs ramping up.
Want access to more CogX videos? Subscribe now for free at cogx.co.